Hello, I'm Anna. Thank you for joining me tonight. I invite you to drift gently into the North Sea winds, among the creaking boats and salted air of a Viking fishing village. But beware. It's not as romantic as the sagas might have you believe. Let's begin with the cold. Imagine waking before the dawn in a coastal village nestled against the frigid waters of Norway, sometime in the late 800s. The sun is slow to rise here, especially in winter, and when it does, it offers little warmth. You wrap yourself in thick, scratchy wool and animal skins, but the wind still finds your bones. Your hands, stiff and raw from yesterday's toil, must grip wet oars again. There's no room for weakness, not here. The ocean doesn't wait for comfort. Fishing was survival. For most Norse people, it wasn't glory on the battlefield that kept them alive. It was herring, cod, and whale fat. The fjords and open seas were both lifeline and threat. The longboats, you might imagine, the sleek, dragon-headed ships, those were mostly for raids and journeys. For everyday fishermen, the boats were smaller and heavier, their hulls soaked through with salt and hardship. You push off from shore with a crew of 2 or 3. The water slaps against the sides of the boat as you row. No sails yet, not until you're far enough to catch the breeze. The salt spray stings your cracked lips. You brace yourself. The deeper waters are unpredictable, even in summer. In winter, they're murderous. Now, the stench begins. Fish oil, old, soaked ropes, buckets of last week's catch rotting on the shore behind you. It's a smell that lingers in your skin, your beard, even your dreams. But it's also the scent of life, because what you bring back will feed your family, warm your hearth, and sometimes, if you're lucky, buy you favour with the local Jarl. But luck is a fickle god. Your nets are coarse and hand-woven. They snag on rocks, tear on seaweed, and tangle with little warning. You cast them into waters you can't see through, praying for a good haul. Some days you bring up nothing but waterlogged debris. Other days the sea offers more than fish, because out here monsters are real, or so it's believed. Whispers of the Hafgufa, a sea creature so massive it disguised itself as an island, haunt the minds of the crew. Men swear they've seen it rise and sink again into the deep. There are stories of ships vanishing without a trace, devoured by kraken or cursed whirlpools. In truth, they were more likely victims of sudden squalls, rogue waves, or simple misfortune. But when a man is lost at sea, myth fills in the gaps where answers cannot. Your fingers, already numb, work to gut and clean what fish you do catch, there rocking on the open water. Your knife is crude, and the cold has stiffened the blades of your hands. Blood and guts stain the wood beneath your feet. Seagulls shriek above, fighting for scraps, and you swat them away with weary frustration. The sea offers no dignity, only routine. And now, the return journey. Your shoulders ache. The wind has shifted. Rowing home is harder now, upstream and against the gust. If a storm moves in, and often they do, your little boat may not make it. But suppose you do. Suppose the gods smile today. Back at the village your catch is brought to shore and sorted. Some will be smoked over low, smouldering fires. Others salted and dried on racks, if the season allows. The fishy smell again thickens. Some oil will be skimmed and stored in clay pots, used for lamps, or rubbed into tools, or smeared onto skin as a crude barrier from windburn. And you, what do you get? Maybe a bowl of barley stew and a slab of stale bread. Maybe a warm seat near the fire if someone else hasn't taken it. Your hands will stay red, your shoulders sore, your nose dripping. You may sleep, but not deeply, because the sea is always calling and hunger never waits long. There is no saga written for the Viking fisherman, no carved runestone marks his name. But without him there is no village, no feast, no warship fattened with dried cod. And so tomorrow you'll do it all again, until your hands no longer work, until the sea keeps you for good. And that is why you wouldn't last a day in a Viking fishing village. Now, close your eyes and let the waves carry you away, far from frostbitten decks and into the realm of dreams. And now I'll tell you the story of a boy who fled into exile, returned as a giant of war, and met his end beneath an English sky. This is the saga of Harald Sigurdsson, better known to the world as Harald Hardrada, the last great Viking king. But to understand him, we must begin in shadows, in firelight, in exile. Harald was just 15 when his older half-brother, King Olaf, fell at the Battle of Stiklestad. Norway was in turmoil, caught between pagan past and Christian present. Harald, though young, had already seen the bite of blades. He fought in that battle, armour too large for his frame, heart too old for his age. But when Olaf died, Harald fled, across the mountains, through frost and fear. He travelled east, to the courts of Kievan Rus, where Norse warriors were prized as elite mercenaries. There, in foreign halls and snowy forests, Harald hardened, not just in strength, but in cunning. Eventually his journey took him farther still, to Byzantium. And this is where the legend truly grows. In the grand empire of Constantinople, called Miklagard by the Norse, Harald became commander of the famed Varangian Guard, an elite unit of axe-wielding warriors sworn to protect the Byzantine emperor. He fought pirates in the Aegean, rebels in Sicily, Bedouins in the deserts of the Holy Land. One tale says he scaled the walls of a fortress with boiling oil raining down. Another claims he blinded a rival general with a flaming spear. It's hard to separate truth from story, but the truth is already astonishing enough. For nearly a decade Harald amassed gold and glory, but home called. And so he returned to Norway, richer than any man in the land, flanked by soldiers and hardened by foreign war. He took the throne. Not peacefully, of course. Nothing in Harald's life was gentle. He ruled with fire, with law, with fear. Some called him a tyrant, others a hero. He crushed rivals, expanded borders, ordered poems be written in his name, and yet was said to write his own verse, soft words from a man of steel. But Harald was never meant to end quietly in his own bed. In the year 1066 he made one final gamble. He sailed west, with hundreds of ships and thousands of warriors, seeking to conquer England. The English throne was in dispute. The Saxon king Harald Godwinson had only just claimed power. Harald Hardrada, with bloodlines twisted through old treaties and Norse ambition, believed he had a right to rule. He landed in the north of England, bringing steel and fire to the countryside. His army won a swift victory at the Battle of Fulford. The gates of the kingdom creaked open, but fate was waiting. On September 25th, at a place called Stamford Bridge, Harold's story came to an end. The English king, Harald Godwinson, had marched his army more than 180 miles in under 4 days. He arrived before Harald expected, before his men had time to armour. The Viking forces were caught by surprise. Harald, ever the warrior, did not flinch. He fought with no helmet, just a two-handed sword and a chest full of fury. It said he stood tall, nearly 7 feet, striking down men like a storm god. But not even giants last forever. An arrow struck his throat, clean, sudden. And with that, the last great Viking king fell. His army was crushed. Only a few ships returned to Norway, barely enough to fill a bay. The age of the Viking was over. But Harald Hardrada's story lingers in Icelandic sagas, where men live larger than life, in English history as the warrior who came just before the Norman conquest, and in quiet nights like this, when the wind howls through trees and the sea crashes on unseen shores. In the high mountains of Norway, time once paused beneath a glacier, and there a Viking slept for over 1,000 years. Our story begins not in the Viking Age, but in the modern day. In the year 2011, high in the rugged peaks of Oppland County, Norway, the ice began to melt. The glaciers, ancient and slow-moving, had guarded their secrets for millennia. But as the world warmed, the edges of the ice pulled back, revealing things long buried: broken arrows, fragments of cloth, the remnants of ancient shoes, and then something far more haunting, a body, perfectly preserved. He lay face down in the stone-strewn snow at nearly 6,500 feet above sea level. His clothing was intact: stitched wool trousers, leather shoes stuffed with grass for warmth, his tunic rough and practical, nearby his bow, his quiver, his knife. No coins, no gold. Just the gear of a man who lived, and likely died, in the act of something routine, something necessary. They called him the Lendbreen Man, named after the glacier where he was found. He wasn't a king or a raider. He wasn't a warrior celebrated in saga. He was ordinary. And that's what makes him so extraordinary. Because in the Norse world, men like him were the veins that kept the body of society alive. Hunters, traders, messengers, guides. Lendbreen Pass, where he was found, was once a well-travelled mountain route. Used for centuries, it connected inland villages to the coast. Goods moved through it: furs, iron, salt, and news. People moved too: pilgrims, peddlers, even lovers running from strict village rules. The man under the ice may have been any of these: a hunter chasing reindeer, a traveller crossing to another settlement, a boy carrying something precious from one valley to the next. But one day the storm came. The wind rose sharp like knives. Snow fell so fast it buried trails in moments. Maybe he lost his footing. Maybe he sought shelter and never woke up. Or perhaps he died standing, wrapped in white, until the glacier claimed him. For over 1,000 years, no one knew. And then the ice gave him back. Archaeologists rushed to the site, careful and quiet, like mourners at a graveside. They peeled back layers of frost. They catalogued every thread, every splinter of wood. His arrows were still sharp, his boots still strong, his silence absolute. The man was dated to around 300 AD, even earlier than the traditional Viking Age. A proto-Viking, perhaps, a man from the twilight between Rome and Norse mythology. And yet, so much about him felt familiar. His layered clothing told of cold. His tools spoke of survival. His path, frozen in time, hinted at purpose, at movement across a world bigger than we usually imagine. He was not alone either. Dozens of other items have surfaced from the melting ice: a tunic from the year 500, a child's mitten, a wooden ski with the leather binding still attached. All silent witnesses to lives lived and lost in the snow. It makes you wonder, how many feet once walked those paths? How many stories lie buried still? The glaciers of Norway have become time machines, peeling back the veil, one slow inch at a time. They give us no names, no carved runestones or grand poems, just the quiet dignity of lives long forgotten. And perhaps that's what makes it so moving, because in this man, this frozen traveller, we see not just the Norse past, but the human one, someone who rose before dawn, who tied his shoes with fingers stiff from cold, who walked through mist with something on his mind, hope, duty, or fear, and then was gone, until now. So tonight, as you close your eyes, imagine the silence of the mountains, the hush of snow beneath your boots, the world still and white, holding secrets under every drift. And somewhere, beneath that sleeping glacier, the past waits patiently to be remembered. Now imagine you are the Jarl, a Viking chieftain, respected, feared, served. But even for you, a day is not so simple. The morning begins in darkness, broken only by the glow of the hearth. Thick furs wrap your bed. A carved wooden cup of warm ale is offered the moment you rise, just enough to take the edge off the chill. Your servants keep quiet, their heads lowered. Not out of love, but out of obligation, maybe fear. You dress in thick wool and leather layered under a cloak of fox or bear. The brooch that fastens it bears the knotwork of your family, a symbol of status and legacy. Around your waist, a belt with your seax knife. Not for war, just for being seen. Even your meals are political. The longhouse smells of smoke and stew. Pine resin crackles in the fire pit. You sit on the high seat carved with beasts from the old sagas. It faces the door, always, so that no threat may enter without your eyes catching it first. Your warriors, hired men, line the benches to your left and right. They eat with you, but only after you lift your spoon. They laugh only after you laugh. Control is everything. But that doesn't mean your life is easy, because a Jarl's power is always tested. Today a messenger has arrived from a neighbouring farmstead, a dispute over land, a tree felled across a boundary, sheep grazing where they shouldn't. Small things, but small things become blood feuds if not handled carefully. So you listen, not just to the facts, but to the tone, the names, the alliances. Then, with a nod, you speak judgment. A goat to be returned, a fine in silver to be paid. Justice in your hall sounds like finality, but still, it echoes. Later, a trader arrives. He's come from Dublin, or maybe even farther, carrying silk and glass beads, jars of wine from the continent. He speaks a bit of Norse, enough to flatter. You inspect his goods. You test the weight of a small silver pendant in your hand. Your wife, cloaked and quiet beside you, admires it. You allow her to take it, a small gesture, a large message. To rule is to be seen ruling. After the trade, the hall is cleared. And now, the duel. It's not you who fights, but your eldest son. A challenge was issued the night before, one of the young warriors testing his place. You watch from your seat, unmoving, as the two boys clash with wooden swords in the dirt yard outside. Their breaths fog in the cold. The crowd murmurs. One stumbles, another roars. You say nothing, because here might still matters, and those who might lead one day must bleed first. When your son wins, you nod once. There is no praise, not in front of the others. He will feel pride just from your silence. The other boy limps off, humbled but alive. And tomorrow, perhaps, he'll serve even more loyally. The afternoon passes with the rhythm of command. A ship must be outfitted for spring raids. You inspect the planks, check the resin seals. Your blacksmith shows you a new axe head, broad and heavy. You test its balance. Your mind is always half a season ahead, because peace is just the quiet between storms. And tonight comes the feast. Torches line the walls. Spit roasted meat fills the hall with scent. Horns of mead pass from hand to hand. You sit at the high seat again, flanked by shield and sword. Poets, skalds, recite your deeds in rhyme. Tales of past battles, icy rivers crossed, gold taken from Saxon churches. You know how much of it is exaggerated, but you let them speak. Let the younger warriors believe you are invincible. Let your enemies think you dine with Odin. Even a Jarl needs myth. Before sleep you visit the sacred grove, a quiet place, just you and the carved wooden gods. You place an offering, perhaps a bit of bread or a drop of mead. You whisper no prayers, that's not your way. But still, you ask for strength, because to be a Jarl is to be always watched, by men, by gods, by those who wait for your chair to empty, then back to your hall. The fire is low, the wolf fur bed waits. You close your eyes beneath timber beams carved with dragons, and dream not of battle, but of peace. Because even a Jarl, especially a Jarl, hungers for peace he can never truly keep. Okay, now let's drift back to the 12th century. The bells have rung. The sun has barely lifted its face over the hills. And within the thick stone walls of a Benedictine monastery, a young boy stirs beneath a coarse woolen blanket. He is 12 years old, and today, like every day, begins in darkness. They call him a novice, not yet a full monk, just one in training. And this winter, in the abbey nestled in the frosty English countryside, the air bites like iron. There is no fire in the dormitory, no warmth but that of bodies huddled under threadbare cloth, and the breath of brothers rising like smoke into the vaulted ceiling. The novice's day begins at matins, the first of 8 daily prayers. It is still deep night, perhaps around 2 or 3 in the morning. The bell tower chimes, hollow and eternal, waking every soul. There is no talking, only the sound of bare feet on frozen stone, as the monks shuffle in silence to the chapel, their habits brushing like whispers in the cold. And there, in the dim glow of beeswax candles, begins the chant. Psalms, Latin verses and antiphons, repetitive, hypnotic, and endless. To the outsider it may sound beautiful, but for the novice, sleep-deprived, shivering, it is a form of discipline cloaked in devotion. His stomach growls. He has eaten nothing since yesterday's single meal. A bit of coarse bread, a ladle of stew, maybe an onion if the kitchen was feeling generous. But food is not meant to comfort here. It is fuel for prayer, not pleasure. After matins and lauds, there may be an hour or 2 of rest, if you are lucky. But soon comes prime, and then terce, and the work begins. In the scriptorium, where manuscripts are copied by hand, the air is no warmer than outside. Your ink freezes if you do not keep it close to your skin. You wear fingerless gloves. Your breath fogs over the parchment, and still you write, sometimes scripture, sometimes the rule of Saint Benedict, other times a book of hours or a psalter, to be sent to a distant cathedral. The silence is enforced, not just suggested, enforced. A novice is forbidden to speak unless given permission. Gestures and symbols are used instead, a small sign language born out of necessity and piety. Outside, snow drapes the cloister garden in white. There are no footprints, no one dares wander there today. The wind whistles between stone columns and birds scratch at the windows for crumbs, but you are not permitted to offer them any. Even small kindnesses must wait. In the refectory, the eating hall, meals are taken in absolute silence. You sit on wooden benches, side by side, facing inwards, not across from one another, and as you eat, a monk reads aloud from a religious text. You do not look up. You do not speak. You chew slowly, your hands stiff from cold. It is poverty in principle, but also practicality. The monastery does not waste. Old bread is stewed, spoiled vegetables are salted or dried. Sometimes you are given ale, not water, because it is safer to drink. And still, your belly is never quite full. There are warm places in the abbey. The kitchens sometimes. The warming room, if your monastery was lucky enough to have one, but not for novices. You are expected to endure, to feel the sting of the season, to learn humility through discomfort. At midday there is a break for sext, another prayer, and maybe some manual labour, cleaning, chopping wood, tending the garden, even in the frost. You may mend robes or help the cook, or scrub the floors which stay damp and icy no matter how many times they're cleaned. Your hands are chapped, your lips are cracked, your nose constantly runs. There are no handkerchiefs, just sleeves if you're daring. But you'd best hope the prior doesn't see. And through it all, through the hunger, the cold, the aching monotony, there is this undercurrent of expectation. You are meant to be joyful. The rule of Saint Benedict insists that monks find peace in obedience, serenity in silence, and gladness in labour. But you're 12. You miss your mother's stew. You miss warmth. You miss laughter. By Compline, the final prayer before bed, you are exhausted beyond words. You walk in silence once more to the chapel, bow your head, and chant the last verses of the day. The candles flicker. Your eyes sting. And somewhere in the choir, another novice nods off mid-prayer and is jolted awake by a stern glance. Finally, you return to the dormitory. You slip under your rough blanket. And in the stillness of that frigid chamber, surrounded by the slow breathing of 20 other boys trying not to cough, you close your eyes and pray, not for enlightenment, not for glory, but just for a little more warmth tomorrow. And now we turn the pages of a book that should not exist. A book bound in mystery, shadowed by centuries of silence, and inked, according to legend, with the help of the devil himself. This is the story of Codex Gigas, the giant book, but many know it by a darker name, the Devil's Bible. It was created in a Benedictine monastery in the Kingdom of Bohemia, in what is now the Czech Republic, around the early 13th century. At the time, the monastery at Podlažis was small, humble, and largely unknown. But its reputation would change forever because of one monk, a monk whose name was either forgotten or deliberately erased. What we do know is this: he was a scribe, possibly a scholar, and, as the story goes, he was in terrible trouble. According to medieval legend, this monk had committed a crime so severe he was sentenced to the harshest punishment the order could offer. He was to be walled up alive, bricked into a small cell with no food, no water, left to die slowly in total darkness as penance for his sin. But the monk begged for mercy, and he made a vow. If the abbot would spare his life, he promised to create, in a single night, a book that would contain all the knowledge of the world, scripture, science, medicine, and more. The abbot agreed, and so the monk was given one final night, one candle, one table, one stack of vellum, pages made from stretched animal skin. He worked feverishly, hand-copying entire books of the Bible, histories, medical texts, calendars, and even exorcism rituals. But as the hours crept toward midnight, the task became impossible, and so the monk made a second vow, not to God, but to the devil. In desperation, he cried out to Lucifer himself and offered his soul in exchange for help finishing the manuscript. The legend says the devil accepted, and in a moment, perhaps the blink of an eye, the book was complete. To thank his infernal helper, the monk added one final illustration, a full-page portrait of the devil, not as a metaphor, not hidden in symbols, but plainly, unmistakably, horned, crouching, with green claws and glowing red eyes. That image remains. If you were to visit the Codex Gigas today, you would find it preserved in the National Library of Sweden. It is the largest surviving medieval manuscript in the world, nearly 3 feet tall, weighing over 160 pounds. It contains 310 parchment pages, each one the size of a door panel. It is bound in leather with ornamental metal trim. And yes, page 290 contains that haunting image of the devil. But here's where the story grows even stranger. The handwriting in the entire book appears to be from one person. There are no changes in style, no corrections, no shifts in pressure. Experts estimate that writing the Codex Gigas by hand would take a person over 20 years, working every day, and yet there are no signs of aging in the handwriting, no tremors, no fading eyesight. It is as if it was written in a single long sitting, just as the legend claims. Of course, historians are sceptical. The idea that a man wrote a 620-page illuminated manuscript in one night is implausible. They believe the Codex Gigas was the life's work of a single monk, likely written over decades in monastic silence. But even without the legend, the manuscript is strange. Alongside biblical texts, it includes the etymologies of Isidore of Seville, a kind of medieval encyclopedia, along with herbal remedies, incantations, penitential laws, and a calendar of saints. And then there's the dark shift. Just before the devil's portrait, the manuscript lists a series of exorcism rituals, detailed instructions for driving demons out of the possessed. Why include that? Why bind exorcisms next to psalms? Perhaps the monk was fascinated by the boundaries of good and evil, or perhaps he was afraid. The truth is, we may never know why the devil was painted so prominently, so gloriously in a Christian book. But we do know that the monastery that produced the Codex Gigas fell into decline. By the 15th century, the abbey was dismantled. The book passed through many hands, noble, royal, and ecclesiastical. It was once part of Emperor Rudolf II's collection in Prague, then taken by Swedish troops during the 30 Years' War in 1648. And there it remains, a book too big to carry, too strange to explain, too mysterious to forget. Today, you can still flip through its digitized pages online. You can see the illuminated gold leaf, the inked margins, the glowing figure of the devil. But late at night, as candlelight flickers across old stone walls, you might wonder, did that monk finish the book himself? Or was there truly someone else holding the quill? Let your thoughts drift to the quiet gardens and dim kitchens of a medieval monastery. Tucked behind thick stone walls, where bells mark the passing of the hours and silence is sacred, another kind of devotion was always at work, the care of the body as well as the soul. This is the world of monastic recipes, forgotten brews, simple comforts, and healing foods passed down through ink-stained parchment and whispered instruction. Our setting is the cloister, a rectangular courtyard open to the sky, bordered by arched walkways. Within it, a garden grows, not just for beauty, though there is beauty here, tangled vines, fragrant herbs, and bursts of colour. But each plant serves a purpose. Every leaf, every root has a role to play in the monastery's kitchen and infirmary. Imagine a Benedictine monk with dirt beneath his nails, gently harvesting rosemary, thyme, and sage. These were more than flavour, they were medicine. Monasteries were among the few places in the medieval world where knowledge of plants was preserved and studied. The monks copied ancient Greek and Roman herbal texts by hand. They learned how to steep mullein for coughs, how to grind mustard seed into a warming paste for stiff joints, and how to ferment honey and herbs into a syrup that could soothe the most troubled throat. But meals in the cloister were not feasts. They were often meagre, on purpose. Simplicity was holy. A typical monastic meal might include a slice of rye bread, a ladle of lentil stew, and some boiled vegetables, flavoured with leeks or garlic. Meat was forbidden on most days, though fish was allowed, and often dried or salted for long storage. In winter, root vegetables were the mainstay: turnips, onions, and cabbages stored in cool cellars. Beans and barley provided protein. Cheese was made from goat or sheep's milk, aged in clay jars, crusted with herbs, and eaten slowly. But the monks also brewed. Beer, for instance, was not just allowed, it was encouraged. Ale was safer than water, and it could be nourishing during long fasts. Monks became master brewers, creating rich, dark ales infused with spices like coriander, cloves, and even wild rosemary. In one monastery there was a secret winter brew called Hippocras, a mulled wine sweetened with honey and spiced with cinnamon and ginger. It was thick, warming, and meant for feast days only. And on rare occasions, holy festivals, the arrival of an abbot, or the ordination of a brother, the kitchen would prepare something truly special: a pottage made with dried fruits, nuts, and almond milk, or a flat cake of crushed dates and oats, rolled in honey and pressed between stones, or roasted apples, split and stuffed with herbs, then left to caramelize near the edge of the hearth. Sometimes the monks would preserve herbs in wine: lavender, chamomile, and mint, steeped for days in dark glass bottles, used not for indulgence but to calm the mind or settle the stomach. There were recipes for wormwood tonic and sage syrup, both thought to clear melancholy from the body. And there was honey. The monks loved honey, not only for its sweetness but for its power to preserve. They made honey salves for wounds, honey cakes for feast days, and honeyed vinegar as a sore throat remedy. But just as often, the most important ingredient was time. A broth simmered for hours, a tincture that steeped for weeks, or an ink recipe made from boiled oak galls and iron salts, used to write the very texts these recipes were copied into. And these recipes were indeed written down, tucked into the margins of medical books, inscribed onto scraps of vellum, hidden in binding covers and end papers of more important works. Some survive even today. In an old English abbey, a monk once scribbled a recipe for fever wine: cloves, ginger, and a touch of honey boiled in red wine, and served warm to those burning with illness. In another, we find a curious note: to clear the lungs, crush an onion, mix with goat's milk and honey, warm gently, and sip before prayers. Strange, but tender. A reminder that even within the rigours of religious life there was room for care. The kitchen was more than a place to prepare food. It was a sacred space, a laboratory of survival and compassion. Today, some of these recipes are being rediscovered by historians and herbalists, translated, tested, and brought back to life, not for miracles, but for memory. So, as you drift to sleep tonight, picture this: a flickering fire in a stone hearth, a monk in a linen robe stirring a pot with care, the soft scent of thyme and honey in the air. And outside the wind stirs the cloister garden, where the next remedy quietly grows. And now let us slip behind the carved oak doors of the abbot's private dining chamber, where silence meets silver and simplicity yields, just briefly, to indulgence. The monastery, as we know, was a place of spiritual discipline: poverty, chastity, obedience, daily chants, plain meals, cold cloisters. But at the top of the holy hierarchy sat a figure not quite so bound to hardship: the abbot, father of the monastery, elected for his wisdom, often respected for his learning, and, not uncommonly, recognised for his appetite. Because while most monks shared humble meals in the refectory, seated in silence on hard benches. The abbot dined elsewhere, in private, sometimes alone, sometimes with honoured guests, and what was placed upon his table told a very different story. Imagine a cold winter evening. The stone corridors are dark, the air is still, and yet from behind one thick door comes the faint sound of laughter, the clink of pewter on pottery, and the warm scent of roasted meat. You are in the abbot's hall. The table is covered in a woven linen cloth, stained from use but fine by monastic standards. At its centre rests a glazed ceramic dish, steaming with a rich stew, perhaps made from goose or lamb, with barley, leeks, and a generous hand of herbs. Beside it, a silver cup filled with dark, malty ale, brewed by the monks themselves. Not watered down like the brothers drink in the refectory. This is full strength, served in honour. Bread is brought in, fresh crusted, warm from the bakehouse. Not the dry black rye of the workman's table, but soft white bread, made from sifted flour saved for special occasions. Butter too, and soft cheese flavoured with sage or chives, aged in a cool cellar beneath the garden. And sometimes, if the occasion calls for it, there is meat. Though the rule of St. Benedict forbade it for most monks, exceptions were made for travellers, for the ill, and, unofficially, for abbots, fattened hens, glazed with honey and herbs, roast pork with mustard seeds, even venison or eel if gifts arrived from noble patrons. You see, monasteries were not islands. They were deeply woven into the fabric of medieval society. Nobles made donations, kings granted land, and in return abbots were expected to host, graciously and richly. Banquets were rare, but they happened. And when they did, they revealed the strange dance between holiness and hospitality. Candles were lit. Tapestries were hung to block the cold from the stone walls. A fire blazed in the hearth, something the common monk could only dream of. The abbot would sit in a carved wooden chair, perhaps beside a local bishop or visiting lord. The food was served in courses, first a soup or broth, then bread and cheese, followed by the main meat dish with vegetables and sauces, and finally, if the monastery was wealthy enough, a sweet. Stewed pears in wine, a tart made from dried plums and almonds, or, more rarely, candied ginger wrapped in waxed cloth. All of this prepared not by professional chefs, but by monks, brothers trained in the kitchen, practised in herbcraft, and familiar with the rhythms of feast days. For special guests, monks might even perform music, the soft strum of a psaltery, a simple melody on a reed pipe, or more commonly, the recitation of sacred poetry between courses. The abbot, of course, was expected to remain modest, his feast more generous than grand. But history tells us not all abbots resisted temptation. Records from England and France describe some abbots living almost like lords, riding fine horses, wearing fur-lined robes and drinking imported wines. One even kept a pet monkey, another built a personal bathhouse. The church frowned on such behaviour, but, as with all things, the lines blurred. Because while the monastery promised equality, in practice it mirrored the world. It tried to transcend. Even within the cloister walls there were hierarchies. The abbot presided, monks obeyed, novices endured, and food, always food, revealed the difference. Yet it's important to remember the abbot was not simply feasting for pleasure. He hosted dignitaries. He negotiated land deals. He represented the monastery's wealth and influence in a world that respected appearances. A poorly fed guest might leave insulted. A cold room might offend a bishop. A plain meal might suggest poverty and risk losing support. And so the abbot dined with quiet luxury beneath the gaze of carved saints, beneath the heavy beams of an ancient ceiling. When the meal ended, a final prayer was said, the dishes cleared, the silver wiped and locked away, and once more silence settled over the stones. Outside, the rest of the monastery slept, their bellies half empty, their prayers whispered in cold chapels. But for one evening, behind that oaken door, the world had tasted different, richer, warmer, stranger. Let your thoughts drift to a palace, a grand place of carved beams, glowing tapestries and royal feasts piled high on silver platters. This is Hampton Court, a Tudor masterpiece, and the year is somewhere around 1530. The king on the throne is Henry VIII, and he likes to eat. Feast after feast, day after day. But behind the velvet and the jewelled goblets, down in the kitchens where the air is thick with smoke and steam, another story simmers. The story of someone who was very much not dining with the king. This is the story of a spit boy, the lowest rung on the kitchen ladder, and his job, to sit all day next to a roaring fire, slowly turning whole animals over open flame until they are roasted to the king's liking. He is a child, 9 years old perhaps, or 10, small enough to fit in the narrow roasting alcove, but strong enough to turn the heavy iron spits. His clothes are thin, his skin smells of lard and ash, and his hands are already calloused with burns that will never quite heal. Let us follow him now. It is just after dawn. The kitchens of Hampton Court are already alive. There are over 200 cooks, bakers, butchers and scullions employed to keep the court fed. Boiling, chopping, mincing, stirring, the clatter of pans echoes through stone halls. Barrels of ale are being rolled in. Geese are being plucked. Spices imported from far-off lands are being weighed with trembling care. And in the corner of the great roasting room sits the boy. The fire is already lit, not a gentle hearth, but a blazing wall of flame, hot enough to singe hair from across the room. Before him are 3 metal spits. On one turns a goose, on another a boar's haunch, and on the third a whole deer, seasoned and skewered for the day's great meal. The boy's task is simple in theory. Keep turning. Don't let it burn, don't let it stop, don't fall asleep. And he cannot move more than a few inches from the spit. His hands are wrapped in cloth, but the grease still spits, hisses and burns. Goose fat drips down, searing into the coals. Sometimes it catches and flares, licking up the sides of the meat, and if he's not quick, the entire roast will blacken. And if that happens, there will be consequences. You see, this food is not just for any nobleman. It's for His Majesty, the King, Henry VIII, who expects not just plenty but perfection. Even the vegetables are polished, even the pies are gilded, and the meat must not be ruined. So the boy turns and sweats and stares. Hours pass, no break, no water. He cannot leave the fire because the spits must be turned constantly. There is no automation yet, no clever crank system at Hampton Court. Just children, rotating animals with rhythm and care, like living machines. The grease coats everything, his hands, his arms, even his face. Flies buzz. Ash drifts through the air and settles in his lungs. The smoke stings his eyes, and when he coughs, no one hears over the din of the feast being prepared. Now and then a kitchen master shouts, "Faster! Slower! Too crisp on the edge." The boy obeys, never speaking. He is not there to be seen, only to serve. At midday he might be handed a crust of bread. Some scraps of the meat he turns, if he's lucky. Otherwise he waits, endures, turns. The other boys in the kitchen, the pot scrubbers, the water haulers, mock him sometimes. They don't envy the spit. At least in the scullery, you get to move. At least the scullions don't go home covered in burns. But the spit boy has one advantage. If he survives long enough and doesn't ruin a roast, he might be promoted. He might become a turnbroche, a junior cook, or eventually even a roaster, with his own helpers and a place at the side of the kitchen master. But that's a long way off. Today he is a boy with blistered fingers, sitting on a stool carved from rough oak, coated in tallow, lost in the heat. Outside the court dines. The king laughs. His guests feast on swan, venison, capon, pork pies shaped like castles. Golden goblets clink together. Lutes play soft music in the gallery. And no one, not one noble or duchess, spares a thought for the child who turned the meat. But someone had to. Because without the spit boy, there is no banquet, no aroma of roasting fat, no golden skin, no tender flesh carved onto silver platters. He is invisible, but essential. And when the fire finally dies down, when the last roast is served, when the coals crackle into silence and the plates are licked clean, the boy stands, slow and aching. His arms tremble. He smells of smoke and goose. He wipes his hands on his apron, which is black with grease,